You're listening to the Love Unplugged podcast, episode 13. Today's episode is all about anxiety. We all experience it in various degrees. I personally have experienced it due to a traumatic experience, and boy, did it change my life, and not for the better. It's insane that it can have such a huge impact on how we live, and it can last for so long, and for some people, even forever. That is not okay in my opinion. And when I came across my guest's podcast, I knew I had to chat with her more about this. She has lived through it herself, and she helps others heal and change their mindset around it. I love her approach, and I cannot wait for you to come on this journey with me of taking back control and living a full and happy life anxiety-free. So let's get to it. You are listening to Love Unplugged, a podcast focused on love in all its forms. I'm your host, Jessica Frigon, hopeful romantic and founder of Revue Blanc. I've found that too often love is set aside or taken for granted, and we tend to forget how to care for ourselves and our relationships in the day-to-day chaos. So let's slow down, tune in, and begin our journey of rediscovering love. From honest heart-to-heart conversations with real couples and knowledgeable guests, to deep dive reviews of new products and services that will help you feel beautiful inside and out. If you're looking for relatable advice or wanting to be inspired by real-life love stories, you've come to the right place. Without further ado, let's get to it. Hi, everybody. I am honored to welcome Emily Clark, spiritual guide and anxiety coach, and founder of the Axe Your Anxiety Bootcamp and Love Your Anxiety podcast. Today, we're going to learn all about anxiety, so why we struggle with it, how we can avoid letting it run our lives, and how we can heal and live a happy life. So welcome, Emily. I am so excited to be able to chat with you. But before we start, for those that don't know you yet, would you be able to share a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Jessica. I'm so excited. My name's Emily Clark. I'm a spiritual guide and anxiety coach, and I help my students and my clients all over the world successfully heal their anxiety with my love versus fear method. Yeah.
Awesome. So let's start with your journey. I want to hear about your experience with your anxiety.
Yeah. So, the reason that I do this is because I used to suffer really badly from anxiety. I talk about anxiety being a 1 to 10 scale, 10 being the worst. I was a 9.5 daily for years. But it's so common. So many women that I start working with, they very much experience 9.5 or 10 days. And I just remember the day that I was like, oh my God, I need to get help. I was in a 7-Eleven and I was pouring a Slurpee, and I just remember, as the Slurpee was dropping into the cup, simultaneously, I felt like all of the blood was like draining out of my head. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to faint. And I thought, I just have to get to my car. And I did get to my car and went on throughout my miserable rest of my day as I did. And that was the day that I was like, I need to get help. I'm now fainting in public. No way. That's where my journey began.
So what was your anxiety about?
So the way that I categorize anxiety is it comes down to 3 main fears. I'm not enough, I'm not lovable, and I'm not safe. And my anxiety always comes down to I'm not enough. And so to combat that, I would always, wear a sexy outfit or have the nicest designer purse or buy really expensive makeup and have a nice car. And, and of course you have to show it off because it doesn't matter to you that you need it. It's like, and social media just breeds that kind of behavior. And so that's how I dealt with it. I had to have the perfect looking house, and I had to live my life according to the status quo and, societal beliefs and keeping up with the Joneses and all that stuff. And it just became too much for me.
I can totally understand that. All right. So I want to talk about why we get anxiety and how can we identify the cause of it. So you talked a little bit about the why method, but I want to get a little bit more into that.
Yeah. So it came to me one day when I was kind of deciding how I wanted to do my business. I had started off as like a positivity coach and a women's self-empowerment coach. And I was like, this isn't deep enough. I want deep. And I want like a really deep connection with the women that I help. And my business coach was like, well, what have you suffered with and overcome? And I was like, oh my God, my anxiety. And he was like, perfect. And I was like, okay, so I'm an anxiety coach. And so, it just kind of came to me, this method of categorizing different anxieties, because I get a lot of women that come to me and say, oh, well, do you help people with generalized anxiety? And I'm like, really? You don't have generalized anxiety. Let me narrow it down for you in like 5 seconds. And the thing that I find with women who categorize themselves as generalized anxiety is they suffer from all three, which is not uncommon. I think we feel a certain degree of all three, at many points in our life. It's just, how you cope with it. And so that's what came to me. I was like, hey, well, I'm talking to these women and I'm understanding they're actually really afraid that they're not enough. That's why they're not playing full out in their relationship, or, they're not traveling to the other side of the world, even though they desperately want to. They don't feel like they're going to be safe, or, the list goes on. And so I was seeing a pattern and I was like, okay, this works. And so I just wrapped it into a method, and that's what has worked for me for over a year. And, why I sell out my coaching programs, because it really works. It helps so much.
I can totally second that. When I started listening to your podcast, I mean, I've dealt with so much anxiety in the past, the anxiety that you get from like everyday life type thing, but then from like a specific traumatic situation that I had to experience. And from there, it catapulted into this insane anxiety of like not even being able to be far away from the house and things like that. And I never really understood it. And for some reason, I couldn't place why I was having those anxieties. But when I was listening to your episode, I was like, this makes it so simple. I just don't feel safe.
I was just going to say that to you. I'm like, oh, for sure yours is I'm not safe. Yeah. And something that Tony Robbins says is like, complication will kill anything. In order for it to be, easy to execute, like it has to be understandable and it has to be tangible. And like some people like to call it baby steps, but the brain will get overwhelmed with the how. The soul just wants to experience. And so the easier you can make the how, the easier it is for, a total stranger to follow, or for you to follow anyone.
Exactly. And I love that it's just so simple to identify. And once you know kind of why that is, you can just be like, okay, so I actually don't not feel safe in this current situation.
Yep.
So I don't necessarily need to be feeling like this. It's coming from a different place.
Yeah. I really like to empower women with their anxiety. I really believe that it is just here to teach you a lesson. Learn the lesson, anxiety goes away. And so what I like to do is empower my women, my students, my clients to sort of build like an anxiety tool belt. And so, the next time your anxiety does pop up and go like, hey, what's up? I'm here. You're like, instead of being like, oh my God, this again, you're like, okay, I now know what to do. I immediately stop down, ask myself why. Cool. Why do I not feel safe driving right now? Or why do I feel anxious, driving right now? Oh, well, it's because, people are going really fast and, they're, I feel like I can't pull over if I need to. And, well, that makes me feel, anxious because like, well, what if I need to pull over? Oh my God. And then it's like, okay, well, what's the feeling? It feels like I'm not going to be okay, which the deeper meaning of that is I'm not safe. So in that moment, when you can really quickly do the why method, then you understand in that moment, oh, it's just because I don't feel safe right now. Okay. It's not like I'm broken. It's not like there's something wrong with me. There's such a tendency when we suffer from anxiety to make it like full blown, like, oh my God, I'm broken. I'm wrecked. There's something really wrong with me. Like, I'm so embarrassed. I'm so ashamed. But really, it just comes down to, I'm not enough. I'm not lovable. I'm not safe. In the moment when you can figure that out, then you feel empowered to take action from that place instead of sit and spin like your ego would have you do. Your ego would have you spin in shame and blame and negativity and fear. But when you have like a really connected kind of like guide to follow, then you're like, hey, this is the first step. Why? Okay, this is my fear. Okay, why? And then you go into like, okay, well, if I know that I don't feel safe here, what can I do to learn to be safe here? Do I need something like, mindful? Do I need something spiritual? should I physically not be walking down a dark alley at 12 o'clock at night, right? Like there's so many different options. And the cool thing is, like, I really like to, empower women to be able to do that on their own.
I love that. I definitely love that.
Mm.
I love your approach to healing. And I love how you've named your podcast, Love Your Anxiety. And you're taking away the negative aspect of it because you don't have to view it in that negative way. So can you explain how you came to that approach and how that all works?
Yeah, cool. Well, first of all, thank you. I'm actually wearing one of my sweaters that says Love Your Anxiety on it right now. About a year and a half ago, I read a book called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers, and it's by an incredible author, Debbie Ford. And in it, she explains shadow work. And shadow work is a theory, kind of a concept invented by a Swiss psychologist called Carl Jung. And he talks about the shadow being the part of ourselves that we would rather not be, the part of ourselves that we find shameful or unlovable or just like bad. And I remember, coming full circle with my anxiety, reading this book and going, oh my God, I just have to love it, because spiritual law says, if you love it, it will leave you. And, in the darkest days of your anxiety, you feel like there's no way you could love it. Like, how could you love this thing that you hate? And it's really just a shift in perception, at which, A Course in Miracles, one of my favorite books, calls a miracle. A shift in perception from fear to love is considered a miracle. And so when you can have that shift, and instead of looking at your anxiety as this big bad thing, if you're just willing to see it as like a teacher or just something that's here to teach your soul a lesson, or there's a lesson that your soul needs to learn here in this lifetime, and that there's actually nothing wrong with you. It's just, this is the way that the universe decided to help you. The only way that you can, heal a wound is if you uncover it. So I was reading The Dark Side of Light Chasers by Debbie Ford, and I was reading about all of this like shadow work, and I was like, this is fascinating. Like, and I remember reading a part in the book where she was talking about, the word selfish, and I had such a negative attachment to the word selfish. And I did everything in my power to avoid being considered selfish. And I remember when I was like, she was talking about like, on a radio, you kind of like move the tuner a little bit just to get closer to the frequency that you want. She was talking about that. She's like, use the word that you don't like. And I was like, okay, well, I don't like the word selfish. That really, really triggers me. I do everything to avoid it. And in the book, she kind of talked about how, maybe it's not as bad as you're thinking. Like, maybe in order to be selfish, you need to be selfish to get the job promotion, to run away from the bear in the woods, to, not get hurt in public. Like, there are certain times when you need to be selfish and it's not actually a bad thing. And I remember doing the healing around that. And I was like, oh my God, I could do this with anxiety. Like, this would totally work. And so I started to do it, and I started to show some of my clients who I was already working with, unrelated. Like, I was coaching them for like women's self-empowerment, but some of them did have anxiety. And so I started bringing this concept to them and helping them work through it. And they were seeing really good results. And I was like, maybe I should switch. And so I did.
I love that. I love that you also hated the word selfish, because I was always taught ever since I was young, being selfish is horrible.
Oh yeah. Same girl.
It's just don't, right? But now that I'm older, I'm like, you know what? I have to be selfish in order to take care of myself.
Amen to that. You are so right.
It's not selfish with being like taking care of yourself, right? Like, there's certain things that you may consider selfish, but it's actually not.
Yeah. And like even small things. I mean, let's look at the airplane example. The stewardess always says, put your own mask on first and then help other people. Because if you don't put your own mask on first and you're trying to get other people's masks on, and God forbid something goes wrong and you can't get their mask on, you're toast. You got no air, right? So in order to be, yeah, exactly. Like, you can't be of help to anyone else if you are losing, oxygen for yourself. And oxygen could be like a metaphor for many other things in life. But, the airplane example is perfect. a lot of women will come to me and they're unhappy in their relationships because they're not being selfish enough in their relationships. And they will, if their partner says like, well, what do you want for dinner? And they say, well, I don't really care, whatever. And they're like, oh, do you want Mexican? And they're like, sure. Because in that moment, they don't feel like they're worthy or enough to step into their personal power and go, actually, I would like sushi tonight. And that's that. You can get your Mexican. I'm going to get my sushi. We can still be happy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like people pleasing, right? They're just like bending over backwards, just trying to make everybody else happy. I think we're going to go down a whole other rabbit hole here with that.
Yeah. And like, that's, oh my gosh. I mean, if you want to talk about like social conditioning, women especially are taught to be people pleasers and to not be selfish. And it's like, oh my God, that is such an unhealthy narrative.
100%. Okay. So let's get back to anxiety here. What can people do and apply in their lives to help them minimize the anxiety?
Yeah, good question. So the first thing you want to do is understand why you are suffering, because until you know why you're suffering from anxiety, it's very pointless. It's like meaningless suffering, which is the worst kind of suffering because, there's no reason for it. And, your ego will loop you in that for sure. And so the first thing to empower yourself about healing your anxiety is to fully understand why. Narrow yours down. And it'll either come down to I'm not enough, I'm not lovable, I'm not safe. And what you want to do is if you feel like throughout the day, all three fears can be triggered, it would be so powerful for you to just focus on one and heal one at a time. Don't try to heal all three at a time. Just try to heal one at a time. And what I found with my girls is once you heal one anxiety, the other ones are much more lessened. And the same principle of healing applies to all three. So once you've healed one anxiety, then start to work on the other ones. And it gets easier and easier. But that would be the first thing. Understand why this has been brought to you. Because, the universe is always, it's for you. Like everything that's happening to you is actually happening for you. And when you start to see the world that way, it's a total game changer. Like your suffering ends right away.
I love that.
Yeah. So that would be the first thing. First, understand why. And then you want to take steps to learning more about that topic. Like if your anxiety comes down to I'm not safe, try to understand why. And so read a book or listen to a podcast or YouTube a motivational speech about that and just really sink into the messaging and see how it can apply to you. Help is always available. And it's just about going out and getting it, because one of my favorite quotes is successful people ask for help. And so, find help, talk to a counselor, talk to a therapist, hire a coach, get a mentor, whatever that looks like for you. Make sure that you have someone who's your cheerleader. Make sure you have someone who's your safe space. Make sure you have someone who you can, call at 11:45 at night when you really need them. So that would be my second piece of advice. Understand why you have it, then take steps to understand it more so that you can empower yourself to heal that. And then the third thing that I would say is super important is your spiritual practice. If you follow me on Instagram, I am meditating every morning. I journal every morning. It's a deal breaker for me. Like I cannot not meditate or journal because studies have been shown that meditating and journaling keep you very present, and the anxious mind loves to live in the future. And so if you can spend, even just 10 minutes a day in the morning meditating, 5 or 10 minutes journaling, whatever that looks like for you, what you're really doing in that moment is you are being present, but you also have the opportunity to enroll yourself in your new belief system that you just spent time learning about. So if your anxiety comes down to I'm not enough, you want to read a book about it or listen to a podcast or find something on YouTube or talk to a mentor. And then, take what they said to you and apply that in your meditation. So something as simple that you could say in the morning is like, I am enough. I deserve to be here. I choose to be here. And I take up the space that I take up. Like I deserve to be here. I am enough. And so by saying that to yourself in the morning, you're enrolling yourself in that belief, but you're also setting yourself up for a successful day. Because while you're setting that intention, you're also magnetizing it towards you. So I always tell my girls, I'm like, do not check your phone first thing in the morning. Check your journal, check your meditation first thing in the morning, because that's what's actually going to help you heal your anxiety long term.
I definitely need to take a cue there. That's good advice. Awesome. I did take a cue from your podcast where you let everybody know what essential oils you were diffusing.
Yeah.
At the start of each podcast. So I've started doing that now for my podcast episodes, and it's definitely helped me relax a little bit, because I definitely don't like talking for hours on end. But it's definitely helped, and I love it. It definitely sets the tone and the mood, and it definitely calms you depending on which oils you choose.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Thanks for sharing that with me. By the way, you're doing a great job. You speak well.
Thank you very much. So I know quite a few people that do have anxiety. Some of them, have struggle sleeping at night. They have to take medications, or they have to take melatonin quite a bit, which if you do take that, there are some effects to it. So it's not something you should be doing all the time. And I'm definitely not a fan of prescriptions, and always prefer to go the natural remedy way.
Same.
So what can people do to help them have a night's restful sleep?
Yeah. A couple of my girls used to struggle with this a lot, and they would take sleeping medications, or they would, try to exhaust themselves so much by staying up a day or two and like try to then fall asleep. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, your system must be so unhappy with you. All right, let's reset this. So, one of the things that, there's a couple of things. There's like a little mini checklist. Let's do this. So, first you want to set the mood. So, your body knows when it's time to go to bed. It's like dawn to dusk. Your body knows. And especially if you've had a very trying day, you're exhausted. And so you should be. At the end of the day, you should hit the pillow and within 10 minutes, fall asleep. So what I like to tell my girls is, if they're having trouble falling asleep, make sure that you fall asleep or try to fall asleep at the same time every day. A lot of studies show that if you're kind of falling asleep at 10 p.m., but then 2 a.m. and then midnight, it's kind of all over the place, and your body wants harmony. So if you can put yourself to bed at the same time every day, that's really, really going to help your body understand, okay, it's kind of time to go to bed. We're getting close to that time, because your body's so smart. It knows. So that would be the first thing. One, pick a time that works best for you, that you know that every single night you can pretty much hit the mark. The next thing that I would say is get off of your screens about half an hour or an hour, even if you can. But for sure, get off of your screens half an hour before you go to bed. And that's because of the whole white light situation. So your TV, your cell phone, your tablet, your laptop, anything with a screen is giving off this white light that is not nice for our eyeballs. I know a lot of women who have those special blue light glasses that actually counterbalance the blue light. And it's also an option on your phone that you can, at least on the iPhone, you can turn on nighttime, and it goes more of a yellowy white, which is a lot more nice for our eyeballs, and it affects your REM sleep and all of that stuff. So for sure, hop off any kind of screen half an hour before bedtime. That's really going to help you. It's going to help your system kind of calm down. The next thing I would say is if you do have a diffuser, throw down some lavender. That's a really calming, that's the oil of calm and communication. So that would be really nice for you to diffuse. If you have crystals, there's a number of crystals that you can use to have on your bedside table. What could you have? Black tourmaline is a really, really good one to have by your bedside table. It literally absorbs negative energy. You could have selenite by your bedside table. I wear it every single day on my neck to protect me from outside energy. You could have clear quartz that really works well to kind of cleanse your aura. These are just simple things that you can Google. So, find what works right for you, but it's good to have that kind of energy in the room. A salt lamp would be great too in your bedroom, because it emits the same ions as a waterfall and nature. So that's really calming to the human body. Let's see. You could meditate before bed. You could throw down a meditation if you wanted. And then if your routine kind of doesn't give you the outcome that you're looking for, my naturopath suggested magnesium. So magnesium is a natural occurring thing in our body. I sound so cool. It's naturally occurring in our body. And actually a lot of North Americans suffer from not enough magnesium. It's like we need it. And so I think there's a couple of drinks that you can buy that are magnesium specific for bedtime, but you can also just get the magnesium pill from your naturopath or from your pharmacy and pop one of those before bedtime. It's not like a sleeping pill. It's not going to knock you out, but once you are asleep, it's going to keep you in that deeper sleep. Mm-hmm. What else?
I've been trying golden milk.
Oh, the turmeric?
Yeah.
Yeah. How's that going?
So far, it's been working pretty well. I mean, I don't have a lot of issues sleeping within 2 minutes of hitting the pillow, but I do it with friends on. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah. No, hey, look, I get that. It's funny. Your serotonin's up. That's good.
Yeah, it totally just knocks me out. Within 2 minutes, I'm gone. But I feel like with the golden milk, I find that my sleep is more peaceful and restful. Like I wake up feeling refreshed.
Oh, nice. Yeah, there's something about dairy because when I was young, when my brother and I were young, my dad would sometimes give us hot milk and honey before we went to bed, and we were like, "Oh, this is the best." Now I can't even imagine giving my child hot milk and honey before bedtime. But there are some studies that show that like warm milk can make you kind of sleepy. There's got to be something in like the dairy or the lactose or something like that. So if it works for you, that's awesome. I would suggest that too.
Yeah, I do it with the almond milk just because the dairy, I'm just kind of.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I don't drink milk very often, but yeah that's awesome.
Okay, I'm going to keep trying that. I'm going to get all of those other crystals though. Those, those sound interesting to me. Mm-hmm. All right. So my next question is about communication. So, I mean, even I've kind of felt this talking about my anxiety with family friends or friends and whatnot. It's kind of one of those topics you really just don't want to talk about. People don't really always understand kind of how it feels because they're not experiencing it themselves, or maybe they've never really had too much anxiety, so they just don't get it. So how can you really have a successful conversation with people so that they understand and they don't kind of look at you negatively?
Yeah, this is such a good question. So the first thing that I would say is like, you need to know your stuff. Mm-hmm. Before you explain your anxiety to anybody else, you really need to know your stuff because for sure they're going to fire some questions back at you. And if you can't answer them, their default reaction is probably going to be frustration or avoidance. And that's not, how to have a, effective conversation about anxiety. So the first thing I would say is like, know your stuff, know what your anxiety comes down to, know what your triggers are, know that you are getting some sort of help for it, whether you're reading books or listening to a podcast or you've hired a coach or you have a mentor or a therapist, just knowing that you're working on something gives people a lot of contentment and confidence because if you can imagine telling your parents that you have anxiety and going, I have anxiety, I don't know what to do. They're going to be like, oh, what's going on? Especially someone who's never suffered from it. They're going to panic because there's such this stigma around anxiety and depression and mental health and stuff like that. So the first thing that I would say is before you talk to anybody about your anxiety, know your stuff. So that when they do ask you questions to kind of understand more about your anxiety or more about what you're going through, you can accurately show them what it looks like. And they can be like, oh, well, that makes sense. Yeah. So yeah, for sure. First thing, know your stuff about your anxiety. And then the second thing that I would tell them is, really lead the conversation. This is where you really need to take the reins on the conversation. And it wouldn't be bad for you to show up to conversation and go, hey, I need to tell you about my anxiety, but I really need you to remove judgment and to just be open-minded while I talk to you about this. Just give them directions. Human beings love to be told what to do. So I know you probably already have some preconceived notions about anxiety and what it looks like and, how it takes over somebody's life. I just need you to reserve those for a minute so that I can, tell you what I'm going through because it might be different for someone else. So just tell them to reserve their judgment and be open-minded. Mm-hmm. And then the next thing I would say is just lay it out for them. Be like, okay, so like you can probably tell that I've been like, a little bit more reserved lately and haven't wanted to come out and party or haven't wanted to like join you and the family, or, I've just been staying at home. This is because lately I've really had a hard time understanding my anxiety and it's just really overwhelming me right now. And so just kind of lead the conversation that way. Say what you need to say and then ask them what they feel. Ask them what they think. If you're speaking to a man, ask him what he thinks. If you're speaking to a woman, ask her how she feels. Because women want their feelings to be respected, men want their thoughts to be respected. So just ask them their feedback so that they also have a chance to voice themselves. It's a two-way conversation, right? Mm-hmm. So when the floor is open like that, the energy is a lot more high vibe, and it's just a nicer way to communicate when no one's trying to shut up the other person. And just open the floor up for conversation. And if they ask you a question that you don't know more about your anxiety, just say, you know what, that's a really good question. I'm not really sure. I'm going to ask my blank, so-and-so, whoever, coach, mentor, therapist, and I'll get back to you on that. But that would be the best way to have a successful conversation about your anxiety with someone outside of you. I actually did a full podcast on that because I had similar questions in my DMs. Women were trying to explain their anxiety to their bosses or their boyfriends or their family members or their friends, and they just didn't know how to approach it. So I was like, all right, I'll do a podcast for you.
I was always worried that, they just wouldn't understand it. So they would downplay it. Like I'm making a bigger deal out of something small.
And that's actually your shadow. So what we were talking about before, your ego or your shadow is actually making you feel that way. So you project it out to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a good opportunity for you to turn inward and go, I'm not making a big deal out of this. This is a lesson my soul needs to learn. And this is just something that I have to go through. It's temporary.
Definitely. This kind of ties into one of my last questions about the law of attraction. So you have another episode that's fully on releasing anxious energy and how the law of attraction plays into that, which I am a huge believer in, been taught throughout my entire life about the law of attraction. So
right on.
Can you share a few key points from that episode, but not too much because we want people to listen to that episode so they get the most out of it as well?
Yeah. So, basically, the way that energy works is human beings are a vibration. We are a beacon and we attract whatever we are embodying. And so a lot of the times what I find when I start working with a new client or a new student, they are harboring or embodying so much fearful and anxious energy. And when you trap it inside of you and when you embody it, guess what? You're also attracting more of it, which as an anxious person, nothing sounds worse. You're like, oh God, no. Right? So what I teach my girls is to release judgment from their anxiety, release the attachment from it so that you no longer are embodying that energy and those fearful thoughts and anxious feelings and beliefs. And what's really beautiful about that is when you do learn to release that energy, which by the way is super easy, when you release it, you're no longer attracting it to you. So it's almost like you start to get a real chance at healing it. Because if you're always embodying fearful and anxious and negative energy, you're always attracting it. And, the universe is just a mirror. The universe will mirror back to you what you know, feel, and believe. And so if you are really knowing your anxiety and really feeling your fear and really believing the negativity, the universe is just going to mirror that back to you through situations, through people, through experiences. So, you are the most important part of your anxiety healing. And releasing that energy just takes a couple of seconds. And, I can walk you through it right now on this episode if you like, but it's just really easy to release that energy and then to recenter.
Do you talk about that on your episode? Like the steps to release? Okay.
Yeah.
So everybody needs to go to her podcast and listen to that episode to get those steps. And I'm definitely going to do it myself.
Yeah.
So I want to learn more about the services that you offer, the boot camp, what that kind of entails. And then if you want to share a little bit about your podcast and what you do with your podcast, what you offer.
Yeah, totally. So I'm always on Instagram. You will always find me there. And so that's the easiest way to connect with me. And I often talk about that on my podcast. I'm like, hey, if you're struggling with something that I'm explaining in this episode, please message me. I would love to help you. And then I also have a free boot camp. So it's my Axe Your Anxiety boot camp. It's 3 videos. In the first video, I show you how to narrow down exactly which anxiety you are suffering from. I'm not enough. I'm not lovable. I'm not safe. And then in the second video, I show you how to actually love it. Hence, love your anxiety. And then in the third video, I have like a checklist for you, like a daily checklist on how to kind of run your day so that you're actually healing your anxiety instead of just like accumulating it. And so that's an amazing way to really experience me and my coaching before you actually sign up for my paid services. Because I know the online coaching space, it's unregulated. There's no like university course for it. And so, you really want to be careful about who you invest with and make sure that they're living out of integrity, make sure that they're coaching out of integrity. And oh my God, make sure that they have client testimonials
Yes.
to prove, to back up, social proof is so important, especially when you're handing over your credit card. So, so the Axe Your Anxiety Bootcamp is an amazing way to coach with me for free, just to get a sense for it, just to get a feel for it. And we have over like 300 women who have done it. So it's amazing. And so then those would be, the free offers that I love to provide for women that really, really help empower them. And then the reason that I offer coaching is because information alone does not equal transformation. If it did, you would read a self-help book and be fixed. But as a human being, we have shadows, we have egos, we have limiting beliefs, we have blind spots. And so the reason why a coach or a mentor is so impactful and so amazing for your transformation is because we can see your blind spots. Like, hey, did you know that you were being really, really hard on yourself? Like, let's pull the thread on that. Like, what's up with that? And so, those little tiny blocks could be, keeping you from actually healing your anxiety. So that's why coaching is really important, because it's information and it's also support. Information and support equal transformation. And I'm not taking away, any power from anyone. Like, if you can listen to my podcast and heal yourself, like, goddamn, send me a DM. Yes, I would love nothing more than that. But, some of us do have limiting beliefs and blocks and blind spots. And it's also just really nice to have a cheerleader and, a safe place to go to. That's why I really love my group coaching. So I have a 12-week, it's not a boot camp, it's like a 12-week mentorship coaching program. And in there, you coach with a whole bunch of other women. And then I also have private one-on-one coaching. But, I usually sell out my 12-week program. So yeah, those are the ways that you can work with me.
Awesome. What about your podcast?
So my podcast is just an awesome way for me to intimately communicate with you. And I used to be a radio announcer. So like speaking in front of a microphone is completely normal to me. And I freaking love it.
You do it well.
Thank you. I've had lots of training. And so I love, I've gotten the most amazing messages from women saying like, oh my God, I listen to you while I'm driving, or I listen to you while I'm walking from class to class on campus, or, oh my God, I'm listening to you on repeat while I do laundry for 6 kids, or whatever it is. And it's like, yes, the podcast is such an amazing way for me to give you information so that you can then apply it to your life and then hopefully have a transformation. Like, I give away my best stuff on my podcast.
I do love it.
Oh, thank you.
It's very calming. It's relaxing to listen to.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I try to make it a fun space. Anxiety can be really crappy, and no one understands that more than I do. So that's why my whole podcast is really fun, and same with the music.
Yes.
The music is totally not what you would expect, I don't think.
No, but I love it.
I think the same.
So if anybody wants to learn more about you, where can they find you?
Yeah, best place, Instagram.
And what is your handle?
It is Instagram.com/loveyouranxiety.
Love Your Anxiety. Perfect. And that's the name of her podcast as well. So definitely go check her out. So thank you so much, Emily, for sharing such enlightening information about anxiety and for giving us such amazing advice on how those suffering can overcome it and get to a happy, peaceful place in their lives. I completely recommend listening to Emily's podcast, as every episode is full of relatable advice that I know we can all benefit from. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica. This was so much fun.
I'm Jessica, and thanks for tuning in today to Love Unplugged, the podcast. If there are any questions or topics you'd love answered on the show, head on over to revueblanc.com and share your request with me. If you haven't yet, go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast and share it with a loved one. Your feedback means the world to me, and the community we've created is what fuels our discussions here. After all, this is all for you. Join me next time for another Unplugged conversation.